Hey, good morning, guys. I know it looks like I don't actually have any hair today, but I do. It's sticking out the back of my hat. You know, I'm having a bad hair day. Again, I was having a bad hair day last week, and I'm having a bad hair day today. And I'm just too tired to care. Have you ever been too tired to care about the way you look? I'm pretty much too tired to care about the way I look every week, actually, come to think of it. Huh, maybe it's a pattern. No, I'm just so busy. It's hard to get up and do hair and do makeup and all that stuff. And I just never have done makeup. I don't care. And now I'm gonna be 55 years old in a month and 5 days. And so I really don't care. Oh man, but the nice thing about not wearing makeup is that I don't have to always be washing my face all the time and so much products and everything on my face. So it works out good. Besides, I'm used to the way I look like this, and I don't actually think I look all that good in makeup. Maybe I'm just not very good at it. That could be true, but I'm good at other things. We're all good at different things, and I've just never been good at caring about makeup. I figure if I have to hide my face to look better, I don't look good. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, let's get into this week's lesson. We're going back to being like Jesus. Well, I hope we're going back to being like Jesus. I mean, it'd be terrible if we didn't care about being like Jesus. And this week we're going to talk about honesty. And so we're going to and this is an important lesson to listen to before next week when we start out with Abraham again, because this is a big problem with him. Anyway, let's get into the teaching. Hi, I'm Miss Tyler. Welcome to this week's episode of Context for Kids, where I teach you guys stuff most adults don't even know. If this is your first time hearing, or if you've missed anything, you can find all the episodes archived at contextforkids.podbean.com, which has them downloadable, or at contextforkids.com, where I have transcripts for readers, or on my Context for Kids YouTube channel, where I usually post slightly longer versions. All scripture this week comes from the MTV, the Miss Tyler version, which is the Christian Standard Bible, tweaked a little or a lot to make the context and the content more understandable for kids. Before we start the next chapter of Genesis, I think it's important for us to address the elephant in the room. Have you ever heard that expression? It's something really big that everyone can see, but no one wants to talk about. Like my dentist. Back when I was a kid, who had the stinkiest fingers you could imagine. And not everyone wore gloves back then. And I never said nothing. He was the only dentist in our small town, and it wasn't like I had a choice. And I was always told to respect people who were grown-ups and call them Mr. or Mrs. or Miss or whatever, whatever their last name was. Even though my last name is Rosenquist, that's a mouthful, and so I just say Miss Tyler because Tyler is my first name and very easy to say. Soon I might have to start calling myself Granny Tyler because I'll be 55 years old next month. And most of the people I grew up with are already grandparents. Anyway, speaking of a mouthful, twice a year I had a mouthful of this dentist's stinky fingers. And I know that I couldn't possibly be the only person who ever noticed. Everyone had to know, but I imagine no one was saying anything, and so his stinky fingers were like an elephant that everyone could see but knew and wanted to talk about. Okay, so close your eyes and imagine a huge elephant in your kitchen. And everyone can see it, but no one says a word. That's weird, but you know what? Just about everyone does that. But when it's the Bible and I see an elephant, I like to make sure everyone sees it. And next week, we will be talking about a big one. Whenever Abraham gets scared, he turns into a really dangerous sort of liar that always gets his wife Sarah into huge trouble. We aren't supposed to like that about Abraham, which is exactly why it's in the Bible. In fact, whenever we read about Abraham, we're supposed to think, wow, he did some incredible things because he trusted God, but dang, we need someone better than Abraham to save us. Every time Abraham, Sarah, Jacob, David, or whoever does horrible things, we're not supposed to make excuses about it. It's supposed to make us look forward to reading about Jesus and everything he said and did. And one thing we don't see Jesus do is lying and getting other people into trouble just to save his own skin. One of the best ways we can see which ways we don't trust God is by noticing what we're willing to lie about or to commit other sins for. Of course, not all sins are about trusting God. Sometimes we just really, really want something and it has nothing to do with God at all. We're just selfish sometimes. And at other times we are feeling bad. And so we think that doing something we shouldn't will help us to feel better. And for a minute it does, but that doesn't last long. And now we have the same problem, but we also feel guilty about having done something we shouldn't have. All human beings have a problem with this. Kids, adults, moms, dads, grandmas and grandpas, and your pastor and teachers too. Do you have a pattern? I sure do. A pattern is something about our lives that is predictable. If this happens, then I usually do that. When I get really sad or upset, I eat junk food. A lot of it makes me sick. And I know it will make me sick, but I just want to feel better even though I know I will feel worse for a lot longer. Ugh. Some people get mean or even violent. Violent means hitting people or pushing them or just using their body to hurt someone else's body or their words to hurt people. What kind of person are you when you get scared? Do you hide? Do you fight? Do you run or freeze in place, unable to move? Do you lie? Today we're going to compare what Abraham does when he is scared with how Jesus handled being scared. Yes, Jesus was sure scared right before he was arrested. He knew he was going to die in a terrible, painful, embarrassing way. He begged his Father to find another way, even though Jesus knew there was no other way to rescue all of us from all the sin and death that wants to control us and was controlling the whole world when Jesus was born. It takes more love than any of us can imagine to do something so terrible to save your enemies, even when you're afraid and upset. When Jesus was scared, Peter made it worse by telling him not to die at all. But Jesus went to God when he was scared, and he prayed 3 times. Then he did what he and God and the Holy Spirit had all planned to do from the very beginning: catch Satan and sin and death in their own trap and kick all 3 of them to the curb. But if you aren't ready for something like that right now, it's okay. Neither am I. I'm closer to being like Abraham than being like Jesus, and I bet you are too. One of the very first things we learn about Abraham all the way back in Genesis 12 is that he is terrified of being killed by the men on their travels because his wife Sarah is incredibly beautiful. And not only did he lie about her, but he had a plan to lie. We'll find out about that plan in chapter 20. Abraham told Sarah, "Look, you are really beautiful, and someone is going to see you and want you to be their wife, and they will just kill me so they can have you. So, I want you to do me a big favor. Wherever we go, I want you to go along with my lie. I'm going to tell them that you are not my wife, but that you're just my sister. That way, if they're really determined to take you, they will be generous with me, and that will be a really good deal for me." What did Abraham mean by generous? Well, if a man sees Sarah and wants her for a wife, that means he will pay Abraham with money and critters and slaves and all sorts of things. So not only is Abraham willing to lie to protect himself, but he is also willing to lie in order to get richer. And he's telling Sarah to go along with the lie, even though that could mean being hauled off and forced to live with an idol worshiper who might hurt her when he finds out that she can't have any babies. Sure, Abraham would lose his beautiful wife, but he'd be a lot better off money-wise. Remember that critters and slaves were more valuable than money in those times, and people usually didn't actually have money because how would you even carry it around? Abraham might have been terrified, but I bet Sarah was too. And of course, we know the rest of the story because the Pharaoh over Egypt did just that, and if God hadn't stepped in, then Sarah would have been abandoned in Egypt once Abraham left. Now, yeah, we can totally understand why Abraham might be scared, and if he was anyone else, it would be a lot more understandable. But Abraham is a guy who left his family behind in a city called Haran to travel to the middle of nowhere, as far as he knew. And God told him point blank that he would have kids and grandkids and all that jazz. If Abraham had been thinking, he might have realized, hey, wait a minute, I can't have kids if I'm dead. That means this God is promising to take care of me, so I can't die as long as I keep following him. I don't have to lie to all these men at all. I actually have like a golden ticket, get out of jail free card, and they can't kill me if this God is protecting me. But Abraham didn't really know God well enough to trust him yet. Abraham listened to his fears about what might happen and forgot what God said would happen. Abraham didn't trust the promise about the plan, and he wasn't thinking about what that meant for him. As we will see in chapter 20, even with all that's happened since chapter 12, nothing has changed, and Abraham is still telling that lie, though Sarah is now 89 years old and not the beauty she once was. Abraham is still just looking out for himself. Poor Sarah. But Jesus is entirely different. Jesus knows the Father better than anyone because they've always been together. Remember, the Bible tells us that Jesus is God's creative logos, which is translated as word, but logos never means just words. Logos is like all of God's thoughts, and it's very hard to explain. Let's just say that Jesus knows everything on his Father's mind because in some way he is his Father's mind, even if we don't understand how that can possibly work. Remember, our brains are small, mine too, and we aren't smart enough, me neither, to understand how God works. Sometimes we just need to know that we can trust God because Jesus trusts God and because, they're the same. They're good. Their plans are always good. They can see things we can't see and do things we can't do, and they understand what is right and good when we just can't. That doesn't mean that our lives will always be easy, but it does mean that when we go along with God's plans, that our lives will always be blessed. Blessed doesn't mean a lot of stuff and an easy life. It means that God is with us, even when it seems like he isn't, and what he wants more than anything is for us to trust him to do whatever it is he needs to do in our lives. And his plans for us rarely require us to lie to or about anything. That's why Jesus could always be honest, even though he never shared the whole plan with anyone. There's a difference between being honest, which means we don't lie to or trick anyone, and not spilling the beans so that everyone knows every little thing. If Jesus had been telling absolutely everyone what was going to happen, then Satan would have been tipped off, and he wouldn't have allowed the chief priests and the Romans to kill Jesus. Jesus didn't have to lie to trick them. All he had to do was just let them do what they already wanted to do. God works like that a lot with his enemies, letting them do what they want. And the only people who lied were the people who were trying to kill Jesus. Sometimes when we don't trust God to do what we want, And even when we think that what we want is what God wants, we think that lying is a, good idea to make sure it happens our way. And that's a big problem. It's one thing to be dishonest, to lie, when you're hiding an innocent person from an angry mob who wants to kill them, and quite another to lie about someone else so that you get what you want. The first lie doesn't hurt anyone and can actually save the life of an innocent person. But the second kind of lie is actually what the 9th commandment is about. We are not allowed to tell a lie that hurts someone else. There is never a good reason to do that. That's what Abraham was doing with Sarah. He was telling a lie about her that got her hurt at least twice. Worked out good for him, but not for her, and not for Pharaoh, and not for Abimelech and his family in the next chapter of Genesis. Lying is something we have to be wise about, and we always have to be honest with ourselves about why we're doing it. I always say that if you have to lie about someone you don't like, then maybe the truth is that you don't have enough of a reason to hate them in the first place. People tend to want their enemies, or just the people they don't like, to look way worse than they already are, because if they can do that, makes them look better in comparison. But we need to always tell the truth about our friends, and even more, we need to be extra truthful about the people we don't like, because if we're lying about them, then we're the ones who are sinning against God and against them. Lying is serious business, and what's more, it's addictive. Once we start lying, it gets easier and easier to do. Some people lie without even thinking about it. I grew up with someone like that, and it was scary to never be able to trust them. They would lie about me without even thinking about how it would hurt me. Abraham doesn't seem to be thinking about how his lies will hurt his wife Sarah either. And, he should love her more than he loves his own life. He should be willing to die to protect her, but that isn't what happened. Abraham lied because in that area of his life, he didn't trust God to keep his promises, and he was so scared to die that he was willing to sacrifice his own wife. Lying is something that twists our brains around so that we stop thinking about how much other people need us to be honest. Just think about the lies that Jesus could have told to save his own life. Goodness sakes, he could have even saved himself by just telling some really bad truths about other people. But Jesus came to save people and not to get them killed just to protect himself. That kind of Jesus wouldn't be someone we could trust at all. But not even being anxious, worried, and scared could get Jesus to sin and lie. Because Jesus trusted God completely, and he trusted the plan to rescue us from sin and death and the devil, He knows that God is truthful. And so when it came down to it, he understood that dying in such a terrible way was the only way to save us. Now, I want to tell you something really important. Just because you have an opinion about someone or something doesn't make your opinion right or true. An opinion is how you think about something. I might put on a hat or get new glasses and really like them a lot. But you hate my hat and glasses. Do you need to tell me that? Is that the same thing as being honest? Now, if I ask you, then you do need to be honest with me. But just because you hate my hat doesn't mean it's a terrible or ugly hat. It just means you don't like it. I love it, or I wouldn't be wearing it. What if I tell you I'm going to do something that you know is very dangerous? Is that just an opinion, or is it something true you need to share with me? Well, you would feel really terrible if I got hurt because you didn't say anything. So that's a good time to be honest. Like, if I told you I was going to take drugs or run away from home or rob a bank, if you told me the truth about those things and I didn't listen, being honest means that you also need to tell a grown-up you trust what's going on so that they can help. And if you know I'm going to rob a bank, I suggest you call the police too. Believe me, I would get caught and totally end up in jail. I'm not the kind of person who can get away with stuff. God doesn't like me to get away with stuff. Being honest can save someone's life, but it can also ruin a person's life. Gossip is what we call it when we're telling stories about someone to other people when they aren't around. The stories can be true or they can be lies, but they can still hurt people very badly. We have to be wise and we have to be kind about what we share. It's one thing to say, "Hey, did you see Rick at the swim meet? He was so fast." Or how about, "Did you see Rhonda's science fair exhibit? Wow, she is super smart." It's quite another to share something terribly embarrassing that they would be hurt, by if you ever told anyone about it. How about, "That big bully was after the Whitaker twins yesterday and they ran away screaming and crying like little babies." Well, that may be true, but it's cruel. There isn't any good reason to share something like that. You would certainly hate it if people were saying it about you. And if the Whitaker twins were chasing me, I'd scream and cry like little babies too. All right. Or one little baby anyway. Now, there were some things Jesus said in his parables that look like lies, but they were actually just examples of good storytelling. The rich man and Lazarus were made-up people, and Jesus wasn't telling a real story of something that had happened. It was just a made-up story, teaching the people about how different things will be in the world to come based on how we treat people in this life. When Jesus called the mustard seed the smallest seed in the world, he was not teaching science. Everyone knew it wasn't actually the smallest seed, but it was an expression, a way of making a point that everyone would recognize. No one's going, "No, Jesus, you are so wrong. Orchid seeds are smaller, and I know because my family plants them and eats the tuber roots." And Jesus would have said, "Hey, dude, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a way of looking at things, chill out." We call expressions like that proverbial. Like when you would hear the Jews in Galilee talking about a camel going through the eye of the needle. It meant something that's impossible. Now, further east in Babylon, they wrote about an elephant going through the eye of a needle. And that's because the camel was the biggest animal in Israel, and the elephant was the biggest animal in Babylon. That story that you might hear about there being a gate in the walls of Jerusalem called the Eye of the Needle and being so small that a man had to take all the stuff off his camel to get through is just made up. No one would do that. They'd just use another gate. There were a lot of gates. We know the names of all the gates, and this isn't one of them. But sometimes grown-ups want to tell an entertaining story to make a point. And you will find stories out there that are just completely made up. And maybe the first person who told this story was just saying, "What if?" And then others passed it along like it was true. Sometimes people don't even know that they aren't telling the truth. But God never needs us to lie in order to make his promises happen. Can you imagine a God who is so pathetic and weak that he needs us to lie? This year, you will be seeing a lot of that because it's an election year here in America, and a lot of people out there are absolutely lying about this or that person or topic just because they want to get people to vote the way they want them to vote. And they think it's a good idea to lie. And Christians are doing it too. But if someone only does what you want them to do because you or I lied to them, then they didn't have a chance to really do what was right. When we lie, we make it almost impossible for them to know what the truth is, and especially if they trusted us. And then someday when someone comes along and tells them the truth, and they find out that we lied, they aren't going to trust us anymore. And it's one thing for people not to trust us when it comes to elections and politics and politicians, but someone who doesn't trust us with those things is never going to trust if we tell them about Jesus. Wouldn't that be sad? Whoever becomes president is nothing compared to the people needing to be able to trust what we say about Jesus. In another 50 years, those people running for president will be long dead and forgotten. but people will still need Jesus. When they can't trust us, that's something that Jesus calls a stumbling block. A stumbling block is something that causes people to trip and fall down. Can you imagine what would have happened if Abraham had tried to tell Pharaoh or Abimelech about God after he lied to them and got them in all sorts of trouble? Do you think they would even want to listen? Pharaoh told Abraham to get out of Egypt and never come back. All because Abraham lied. When Jesus' disciples went out into all the world telling people about Jesus, they had to try and be as perfect as possible, because if they were dirty, rotten scoundrels, then no one would want to hear about their God. Psalm 135 and 115 say that everyone becomes just like whatever or whoever it is that they worship. How the disciples acted showed the people of the Roman Empire what God is like. Is God honest or a trickster? Does God only love the Jews, or does he love the Gentiles just as much? You know, Peter once got into some bad trouble because he was making it look like it was okay for the Jewish believers in Jesus to not eat with the Gentile believers. Some people came from Jerusalem to where Peter was preaching in Antioch in Galatia and convinced him that there were two kinds of people, them and us. And so Peter stopped eating dinner with the Gentiles, and that made it look like God thought of them as second-class citizens and not his own beloved children, no different than the Jewish believers. And boy, oh boy, did Paul let him have it, because what Peter did is what, people thought God would do. Peter could work miracles and was one of Jesus's closest disciples, and so being rejected by Peter meant being rejected by God. It got so bad that a lot of them were considering having circumcision surgery and becoming Jewish just so they could be included with the popular kids who were eating with Peter. The Bible tells us that at Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came and lived in the believers, everyone who accepts Jesus as their king, they became part of a living temple, a temple made from stones that are alive, and those stones are us. So when we lie, we're making God's temple dirty. We make it look like a filthy and gross place where no one in their right mind would want to worship. My really good friend Ryan White told me something yesterday that is really interesting. In the early days of the church, after Jesus went back to God the Father, people in Jerusalem were all living as a group because they thought Jesus would be coming back very soon. And people who owned land would sell the land, and they would take the money and give it to the group, and that money would be used to feed everyone. And that was a kind thing to do. But there was a husband and wife named Ananias and Sapphira who sold some land because they wanted everyone to be impressed with them. They only gave part of the money to the disciples, which wasn't a problem because it was their money. But they were pretending to give all of it. Because they both lied, they died on the spot. God couldn't have them lying like that in his holy community and getting away with it in front of everyone. That community of people was a temple, and they were in Jerusalem where God put his name forever. When Ananias and Sapphira promised that they had really given the disciples all the money they got, it was like lying inside God's own temple, and they fell down dead just like someone would if they touched the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't have to lie. They just wanted to show off and get away with it. I love you. I'm praying for you. I want you to think about And talk about a time where you trusted someone and they lied to you for a really dumb reason. And if you still trust them, or if you don't trust them, even when they're telling the truth. It's a terrible thing when we tell the truth, but people don't believe us because of lies we have told them in the past. And next week, we are going to be finally getting to Genesis 20 and starting up with the story of Abraham again.